Hello and a very good morning. It really is morning. I hope someone's there and someone's more awake than me. I don't really do mornings, so I do apologise if I stumble like an old clown. But welcome to Sunday morning's extravaganza spring shoots. And today we're going to talk about some getting editing, because I'm sure you've had lots of lovely talks about how to shoot, what to shoot on, and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to dip in to some editing today, and we're going to call this Slice and Splice because it's a bit more fun than editing now. That is my QR code if you do want to grab it, and that will take you through to my contact details and also some kit lists and stuff about other stuff that I shoot with, etc., etc. Now, just want to say before we do start, I am going to be checking the chat here, so I'm going to look down, and it might be rude, but I'm going to keep refreshing stuff as we go. So if you do have any questions, pop them in the box and I'll refresh and try and hit those as we go. Also, just to clarify, I'm not going to kind of talk about editing software per se. I'm going to do a generic. I am using Final Cut, but don't switch off because it's not going to be a tutorial on Final Cut. I'm going to keep this generic. It's just that it's the one I'm most comfortable with and the one that I'm least frightened about using on a screen share, basically. So let's just kick off, shall we, with a little intro. And some of you may have dipped into editing before, some of you might haven't. So I'm kind of just going to a quick sort of summary, if you like, about editing stuff. So go back to the beginning, before computers were what they are today, and it was all what was known as linear editing, and it was pretty much like this, and it was pretty awful. This is what we had to do. We had a tape in one machine and a blank tape in another. We played and we jiggled there and back and we chose the bits we wanted. It was a linear and really annoying, basically. So you had to lay everything onto the tape in the order you wanted it, and if you made a mistake, you had to put all that tape onto another tape and copy. So it was a generational loss every time. So it was basically it was a ball ache, and that's what I guess grew up learning. And so we moved on to non-linear editing, or NLE. And what is it? Well, basically, non-linear editing is, when it comes up, file-based word-like word processing with audio and video. And my slideshow's all messed up because the picture's not coming. It's no one's fault. It's non-destructive. It won't affect the master file. So whatever you put into it, even if you chop the ends off in the edit program, the actual file you put in is always going to be the same length, which is something you kind of should bear in mind when you import the footage. You can randomly access any frame from anywhere at any time because it's using the main file as a reference, and then it's kind of using almost like a copy of it on your edit suite, not an actual copy, just a sort of visual representation of your file. You get metadata like you do with raw photos, so you'll be able to kind of, the cameras will put on where it was shot or the time and date, and if you've got GPS on your camera, it will obviously put that data on as well. Oh, there's the picture coming in at completely the wrong time. And it's really all about workflow, and the key to a successful edit starts with good workflow, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Then we'll get on to the demo, then you can fire questions at me and hopefully I'll be able to understand them. All right, so what you really need to think about is how to up your game and make your edits stand out a little bit from everyone else's, because good edits can make or break good footage, and you can have the best footage in the world, but if you chop it together and it's crappy, it's not going to be very good. But how to up your edit game? Well, first thing to do is organizations. Like I mentioned, workflow organization. That is absolute key. So even if you're just doing a short promo or a feature length documentary, it should really be organized from the start. And if you're shooting by yourself, then shooting for the edit is something you should think about. So when you go out with your camera, how you shoot and the order which shoot and all those kind of things, it will help you edit better. Even though, yes, you could film all out of sequence, which is fine. But if, you can try and keep to some sort of pattern or order when you're filming, it's going to be a lot more easier to organize your footage afterwards. And when you're in the edit, don't rely on plugins and fancy schmancy graphics. I've noticed a tendency with people, you know, they get iMovie open for the first time, or Premiere, whatever it is, and they try and throw in every effect into a, you know, a 2-minute edit piece. You know, just sometimes simple is better. Usually simple is better. It's my mantra anyway, which is, you know, about right for me, being simple. But don't rely on things to make the edit for you. You know, a fancy wipe between two scenes isn't going to necessarily make it more exciting. And we're going to look at a few different ways of using effects carefully, and also using natural effects, which is something that I'm a big fan of. Learning keyboard shortcuts for the edit software that you're on, excuse me, can really help speed things up. And that might mean you can just kind of, you know, muscle memory, you have your fingers over the keyboard like you would do in a photo editing app. And you can just kind of, you know, go to what you need without pretty much looking down at the keyboard. That saves a lot of time. So it's worth customizing your keyboard, or even maybe investing in one of these fancy control surfaces or a Stream Deck or something like that, that you can kind of preset to the regular functions, and then you can, you know, throw them in without sort of having to dip through menus and stuff. So that's always worth investigating. And if you're doing this for money, which I'm sure many of us are here, then valuing your time is really, really important with edit, more so than anything else, because edit's a bit of a black hole of time. You know, you tell a client you'll do it in a couple of days, but you go, oh, you know what, I'm just going to have my tea and then I'm going to go back and tinker with it a bit more. And you can tinker with an edit for years and still not be perfect. So you have to be able to be very strict, and also say, look, if charging for a 2-day edit, then do a 2-day edit, and maybe kind of keep a half day in lieu for changes or toing of frames. But that's one of the hardest things about doing this is understanding where to draw the line. So it's a bit of a business advice rather than edit advice, but it all kind of comes into play. All right. So and in terms of planning it out, what I've got here is just a sort of demo of something that I did a while back. It's really just showing, this was almost like a pop song that I did with a company, and they were miming to it. But you can see what I've done is I've pretty much immaculately planned out, you know, the first 9 seconds of nothing, it's music, then 9 seconds to 11 seconds, the lyric is that, and whoever's singing it, which team. And I went through the whole song and broke it all down and put everyone into sections like this, because you need this. And when you went on the shoots, of course, I had this form with me, and I could show people, and they could, you know, divvy out the work as such. But organisation is absolutely key to all of this. And now we get on to which software. Now, there's going to be a huge debate about this. I don't really want to get into which software I think is best, because the software that's best is what's best for you, and there's tons of the stuff out there. Basically, there's loads. There's, you know, this, I just did a quick search for video editing software, and this is what kind of popped up. So there's absolute loads of it, and they all do pretty much the same thing. They edit video. Some do it in a slightly different way, but they all generally now will follow a similar pattern, and I'll show you that when I show you some demos in a second. I'll just kind of have a refresh and see if there's any questions. Good morning, Rick. Oh, hello, Hayley. Lovely to have you with us on this Sunday morning. Thank you for your welcome. Okay, so we will now quickly dip in to formats, because unfortunately there are lots of them, and it's something that we have to get our heads around. Now, I did this, I kind of ran through this quickly yesterday in one of my sessions, but I also thought the slide was quite proud of myself for the slide, so I thought I'd throw it again and explain to you. So when we come to edit, and I am going to do a demo of this, there's something that we call punching in. And that essentially means you're taking some footage that's recorded in a higher resolution and dropping it into a smaller resolution, but you've got more to play with. So let me explain what I mean. Now, back in the day, we had SD, and it was about that big, basically, without being technical. Let's say it was there, about that big as an orange square. HD came along, and it was about as big as that green square in relation to standard definition. Excuse me. And then 4K is now moderately common, and that is the size comparison to the HD frame. And then now we're talking about cameras shooting 8K, and Blackmagic have just launched this 12K monster. So it's becoming, the sizes are getting bigger and the files are getting bigger. But critically, in this case, whatever you shoot, shooting at higher quality than you need can help you in your edit. And let me explain what I mean. And it's our old friend, I think, my Frenchman with his beret or cap, playing a guitar. So here is a 4K frame. Now imagine I've got a 4K frame and I'm dropping it into an HD size square. Okay, so let me show you visually what I mean. So here is the 4K, the green 4K square. Excuse me, it's Sunday morning, I'm all groggy. And that's dropped in. So if we were dropping in a 4K frame on top of, sorry, an HD frame on top of a 4K video, that's about where it would be. And we could move around the frame in the edit suite, and I will show you how we do this. So we can pan around and move around, we can go anywhere pretty much. But obviously you would choose a nice shot. So what we get in here, when you pull that into an edit, if you're editing a 4K video in an HD frame, you've got 4 times more space to pan the video around. So if you imagine it's like I show you on the graphic, you can move that graphic around. So I will settle on the face, which means I'm getting 2 shots from one. So if you're out filming and you're shooting 4K and the client isn't needing 4K and you don't need to upload 4K, you can shoot 4K. I keep saying 4K a lot, probably should say it a bit less, but you can shoot at that res and then bring it into the edit and then expand it once you're later on, which is what's known as punching in. And with that also, and I'm going to demo this too, so don't worry, there's not going to be a test at the end. A quick sort of look at frame rates. Now frame rates are important because they can help you make your footage look smoother, look nicer, and for a creative effect. So if you shoot at a higher frame rate, you can make the footage slower in edit really nicely. Now I know edits can pretty much slow down any footage, but sometimes, and usually without lots of interpolation and horrible things doing to the footage, it doesn't look so good. If you shoot at a higher frame rate, then you would want to you make it go slow. So I was just checking the chat. So if you've got a camera on a gimbal, or you've got a little handheld Osmo Pocket or something like that, and you're shooting at 60 frames a second, when you put it into a 30 frames per second timeline, it just goes 2 times slower, nicer. And I'll show you how that sort of works in a moment. And this is really helpful to smooth out handheld work. So if you've got some stuff on a gimbal and you've been shooting yourself, or someone's given you stuff and they've shot at 60 frames a second, it takes out a lot of the jitter, and also actually handheld and gimbal work as well. So let's now, we've got some demos, but I'm going to just have a quick peek at some questions. So Kamini, sorry if that's pronounced wrong. Good morning. You mentioned keyboards. Are there any editing keyboards you would recommend? Well, okay, so I use Final Cut, and you can buy a Final Cut dedicated keyboard. You can buy rubber overlays that go over the keys. But actually, in terms of remembering, it's not that difficult once you kind of learn. You find that they become more of a hindrance, the actual keyboard. I mean, I've got here, I've got a loop deck which I use, and it's a loop deck CT. But to be honest, it's fine. The reason I like it is because it has dials and wheels and things that you can turn to get more accurate. So if you want to adjust color or tone rather than trying to drag a slider or roll the wheel, you can actually turn a control. So for the granularity, if that's a word, I quite enjoy that. But in terms of keyboards, you could invest in a Final Cut keyboard or a DaVinci keyboard. And I know DaVinci make a whole load of like color correctional keyboards and very, very cool stuff. But it's not, you find that you tend to use the same 5 or 6 commands over and over again, and anything more than that, you would probably just kind of drop from the menu. But eventually you get to learn how to change the settings by muscle memory. So even with a dedicated keyboard, you find you're not actually looking at the keyboard much. Once you learn it, excuse me, you're just kind of going for it. All right, so a quick refresh. Does frame rate have a relation to the format? Yes and no. So PAL and NTSC, Hayley, are sort of traditional formats for when America decided to have a different format than the rest of the world. It's not really an issue anymore, because if you might shoot at 1080p or 1080i, but most, especially if you're outputting to the web, it doesn't really matter. So 1080p is progressive, which means you get one whole, I'm not going to go into scan rates, but it mattered when TVs were cathode ray, and you'd have one frame made up of two fields. So you'd have field 1 and field 2, and the frames would go like that, and they'd go very quickly like that over each other. So I, as in 1080i, is interpolated. So it takes the fields and does that with them and gels them together. Whereas progressive is just one frame like that. So one frame is and field melded together. But nowadays, when you output stuff, it's not really much of a thing to do PAL or NTSC. And I know that cameras, you can set them either. But it's more for what will affect the whether you got the camera set to PAL or not is the electricity supply and whether it causes a hum, because that's the frequency that the cameras will ignore. If it's that more than the actual format. So I wouldn't read too much about that and concentrate on the frame rates. Is more to do with if you want to kind of do the slow-mo, or if you want the cinematic thing at 24 frames a second and how it's shot. So I think we should dip in. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it even does. We've got a couple more. Oh, there we go. PAL is 25, NTSC, lots of things coming. Is it a problem in shooting? No, it's not really, because your edit suite will usually conform to whatever the timeline settings you've got, and it will do what it needs to do to chuck away or move. So I've never noticed it being an issue, because 30 frames a second, it's actually 29.95 or something, because it's some awful thing, but it doesn't really matter so much. I've never really had any issue, because 25 frames per second can still be played back on the 30 frames per second TV. It's not really, especially LCDs. I mean, if you're going back to old box TVs, then it might make a difference, but right now I've never noticed anything being a problem. It's more a case of whether you want to have a cinematic effect, which you're shooting at 24 or 25 frames a second and you get that nice sort of cinematic judder, or whether you want it to be a much more video-like effect and a bit smoother, as if you were kind of shooting off a camcorder or your iPhone in default, if you don't use any fancy modes. So if you're shooting at sort of 60 frames a second on your phone, you'll notice the video is very, very smooth. If you drop it down to 24 frames a second, you'll notice that when you pan, you get like that sort of cinematic sort of slight trail behind it. I like the way I'm doing this. I hope that helps. I'm just conscious of time. So let's just have a quick refresh, and then we're going to go on to some demos. Now, wish me luck here, because I'm not a massive fan of demos using software. So as I said, I'm using Final Cut. Now, you don't have to use Final Cut. I'm just using it because I'm very comfortable with it, and I've been using it for 10 years. But the first thing I want to show you is all the rushes. So so if you can see my mouse cursor here, when I first create a project, and it doesn't matter what you're doing it in, let's just imagine it's, even in Premiere or DaVinci, it's all very similar. I like to organize it into folders, or Final Cut do it events. So I'll have music, I'll have rushes, and I'll have final sequences. I might have things like pictures or audio files for separate audio, but let's keep it fairly simple. And then I bring in all the rushes. And when I go through the rushes, what I do is you can see here it's labeled them. It knows when I've brought them in, and it's got all this metadata, but I'm not using that right now because it's just loads of stuff. So you can see I'm bringing them all in. And what I've done already is here's one I made earlier, is I've gone through and I've marked in the bits that I like. So here's the in and out. So what I would do, firstly, I'd go through, you press play, you go, yeah, I want that bit. So I is usually in and O is usually out. So you mark the sections you want. And that's really the first thing that I do when I edit. So I go through all the clips and I thought, yeah, I like that one. I might change my mind, but bear in mind that all you're doing here is you're telling the computer what to pull out from that master clip that's sitting somewhere else on your hard drive. So obviously you've got to be very careful where you put those clips. Final Cut it pulls them all into one space called an event library or a project. But on other systems, I think Premiere used to keep them all in separate folders. So it works slightly differently, but be very careful where your footage is. Anyway, zipping through, excuse me, here's all our footage, it's all shot. Now I will show, it will look all grayed out because it's actually shot in log, and I might have heard that mentioned before. That's a whole new ball game and a whole new story. But just as an example, I've got some presets here, and I've shot this with a Panasonic. So if I drop in there sort of preset for Panasonic, you'll see immediately what it does to the picture. So that's the difference. And then with that, well, it would do if I didn't move the cursor off it. And with that, you have a lot more flexibility for editing. Now, you don't have to. If you are shooting, you do not have to shoot log. It's not the law. People think it's quite the vogue to shoot everything with log at the moment. It does give you more scope for editing on when you're shooting with mirrorless and with a high bit rate and stuff like that. However, you don't have to, because all I did there was basically convert the log footage to what's known as Rec 709, which is essentially the normal video output. So if your video on your camera has got a standard or an REC 709 and you film with it, and I had the same camera, it would probably end up looking something like that straight out of camera. So you don't have to get too worried and het up about shooting log. All right, so let's move on. So we've got our rushes, we've brought them all into the edit suite, and that's all very good. And these clips have all come in as they come in off the camera card. Okay, so here they all are in my list of rushes. Now, the next thing that I like to do is I like to start build. I've done this for the demo, but my folder called sequences. I might do several sequences in delivering before delivering to a client. So, but in this case, I've just done them. I've just labelled them to show you, so I know what I'm doing when I'm working through. But I've got one empty timeline. So here's the timeline. It's very similar on all edit suites. You have a line where video goes, a line where audio goes. You can see the clock here telling you how long it is. There'll be some audio bars. There'll be a whole ton of windows with special effects, and here they are. And it's all it looks very, very complicated, but it's not necessarily too complicated. It would do if I wasn't playing off screen. I'm just checking my time. Right. Okay. So zipping through. Right. We go to scene set up scene 2. Now, what I want to show you here is the slow-mo thing that I was talking about before. So let's take. I'm going to make the timeline a bit bigger so we can see. So let's take where's the bike scene? So here's the bike scene at regular speed. Might be a bit jumpy. So this bike scene here, and I'll show you just to prove it, has been shot at. It is shot at 4K, and it's shot at. See, it's coming there at 59.94 actually randomly. So it's actually shot at 60 frames a second. But when I brought it into my edit suite, it's brought it in at its natural speed, right? So what I do is, it's on Final Cut, but if I go to automatic speed or use original speed or something like that, the equivalent, you'll see it goes slower automatically to 42% because I'm working in a 30 frames a second timeline, so it's roughly half. Am I working in the 30 frames a second timeline? Let's have a look. 25p. So I'm actually working at 25p. But if I play now, watch what happens. Right, now hopefully, I mean, it's going to be judgy because I'm screen sharing, but to me, it needs a little render as well. But you can see it's very, very smooth. And I haven't done anything. I've not added a slow motion effect. It's the natural speed because I put a 60 frames per second clip, and you'll see again. So here is a little bit of a handheld shot, and you see it's a little bit, there's a little bit of camera shake. It was totally handheld. But again, if I automatic speed that, it's going to put it at 42%. So you could do that yourself and drag it to 42%. But if you look now, look how nice and smooth that is. Right, and that's a handheld shot using image stabilization in the camera and then just applying what essentially is just making it the actual speed it was recorded, but because I'm using it on a lower frame rate timeline, it's making it longer. Now, also want to show you, and let's find a good example for this, is here. So we've got that, and it's quite juddery. So let's do the same thing we did with the speed again. All right. So here we got a little thing with speed. It's nice and smooth. Well, it would be if it wasn't a screen share. Now, what I was showing you about the 4K thing. So that clip is, as you can see here, it's 4K. Now, watch the magic, people. So let's go down to our file settings. Now here, this is Apple call it spatial conform. So it's fitted. It's fit the frame into. If I go to fill. Right, it's going to fit. It's all that fit or fill. So it fits the 4K image into my timeline. If I go to none here, watch what happens. Right, it jumps up, and if I then expand the view to where are we? To a little bit lower, so you can see that, and put the guides on. You can see, hopefully, right. I'll go a little bit. It's going to be even smaller. So those blue lines, if you can see those, let me go down even smaller. Right, see that frame? So that is the actual 4K frame where that sort of placeholder is. So hope that's become it. Now, what I was saying before is now this whole frame can be moved around within the HD thing. Now you could shoot in 8K and do it in the 4K timeline. Now you can blow up stuff, or in 4K in a little bit, maybe 10-15% digitally. But this is, you're not blowing anything up, you're just putting it down in its native resolution. So actually, the shot now, if I go to done, and we'll have a look at that as a fit. So now we've got that shot, right? And we've got a close-up, but we've used the same clip. Now this is what I was trying to explain with the punching in. So, and if I then go back, so there's no conforming, the clip isn't being squashed in. Now if I go back to fit again, you'll notice that's it. And what's happened, of course, is because we've moved the frame around, as I'll show you, right? You see we've got all this black area here because we've now moved that 4K frame down and to the right a bit. Okay, so I'm just I'll refresh the chat for everyone just so you can see. Yes, log is a bit like camera raw. Hang on 1 second. Frame, okay, 1 second. Frame blending or frame sampling. Richard, it depends on how it looks. Sometimes it's better to do one or the other. It depends on the, I haven't done any frame blending or sampling when doing that. It's just I'm literally using the footage in its original thing. But if you want to use an effect to do that, then you need to kind of do a small clip of it and see which you prefer. There's no right or wrong. It's just visually what works best. One might work better for extremely slowed down clips. One might work better for clips that aren't slowed down so much. What do you stop the software from converting? Okay, so you don't have to, because you don't stop the software doing it. It would automatically pull the, so when you load a clip into the timeline, I think on all edit systems will pull it will convert the clip as you drop it into the timeline, which is handy because it's actually conforming the clip to make everything what you want. Now the thing with all this is, I'm just going to check my time as well. I've got 12 minutes. Okay. The thing with all this is if the majority of your footage is 4K and you have a couple of clips that are in HD and you need to output in 4K, edit the timeline for the majority of footage that you've got, because it's going to really hurt your computer to try and upscale or downscale HD to 4K if you've no point in editing HD footage in the 4K timeline. So what I'm showing you with the cropping and the punching in is really if you've shot in 4K and you're outputting in HD, or you're outputting in 4K and you've shot in 8K or 6K or something bigger, because it's easy to, like with photos, you can, if you enlarge a small photo, it's going to look crap. If you reduce a big photo and squash it into a smaller space, you're getting more pixels in that smaller space, so it's going to look better. So you work to the timeline with the majority of your footage. Log is not really like camera raw. Camera raw is like the video equivalent, which is huge files. So log is really almost like a color profile, but what it does is it gives you the ability to keep a bit of play. So it's recording, it doesn't record its own profile onto the final footage. It leaves it almost like a slightly more, you've got to add sharpness, and you've got to add a little bit like when you put a raw image in, but and with a it's like a, I guess it's like a base level to start. So it's a kind of flat image with nothing on. And what I did was I dropped in what's known as a LUT, which is almost like a filter, which brings all the contrast back to a standard. So you could get one for moody nights. You can download these, off the internet, and you can drop them on for different cameras. So I just dropped in a Panasonic a Vlog, because I shot in Vlog, and different cameras, and Camera Raw, Canon have C-Log, and Sony have whatever they have too. Anyway, let's jump ahead. And we've not got a huge amount of time, but at this point I might think about adding some effects to the timeline and some music. I've chosen a piece of music. I use stock music, stock library. There's various very good places now to get the music, but you need to think about the pace and all that kind of stuff. But again, it's more of another topic, is how to choose the right music. But I've chosen a piece of music that's roughly about the same length as my final edit. I've got all the clips down here that I've chosen, put them in order, and you should be able to hear that. And so what I've done is I'll just play it a little bit for you. So what you should be able to hear, if you can hear me. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop talking because that's very loud over my earpiece. And so you watch your levels here, so they bounce around. Now again, I did the whole thing on audio yesterday. levels is a whole new thing with audio, but I would always make sure if it's music alone, you're safe to kind of have it peaking. You can have it peaking at 0. I would normally drop it down a little bit to something like minus, hard when I'm hold it on the thing, to -4. And you'll notice then on the bars on the side, they'll probably be hitting about 6. So they'll be kind of peaking about -6. Which is about right. I mean, there was a whole rule with, voice should be -6 and music should be -4 back in sort of analog days. But a lot of it depends on if you hear it, but make sure it's all constant. So if you put every music in it and drop it a few bits to -4, then all the music should come in at that level. Don't have one then blasting away unless you're kind of, dipping under a person talking, which is a whole new issue. So what I've done is I've constructed my timeline. I've added my music, and oops, there we go. I knew that would happen. I'm just trying to check the chat here. 8 minutes. All right, we've got 8 minutes, and I'm conscious we've got some chat questions. Let me see. Let me just refresh. This session is available to watch again. Yes, thanks, Derek. David, hello Rick, if you shoot 4K 60 and your sequence is 1080-25, that's great that you say, but you realise that you want to bring in a voice. How do you work on sync? Okay, so if you want to bring in a voice and you want to sync, it won't make any difference with that, because the file won't, I've never had a problem. So if you recorded a voice at 4K 60 and you bring it in, then obviously if you slow it down, it's going to slow the voice with it. But so there's not a lot you can do. You wouldn't want, it's slow-mo is slow-mo. So you can separate the audio. But, if you want to have someone talking, you wouldn't want them in slow motion, right? So you can have mixed media. So you could drop in a voice clip that's at 60p on the 25p timeline. Just let the edit suite, as in let it do what it would do on the default, because once it's on the default, it's fine. It's what I've gone in and, even here in the finished timeline, right? Or I've not graded it or anything, but here you can see, let's take this shot here, right? Let's see something else. Like, so that's pulled in, that's a slow motion clip, but I can still at any point go back and put it back to the original clip. And that's at the automatic speed. So if I go to normal, there you go. So that's the normal speed, and you can see that obviously the whole timeline jumps down because it's short, but that's the actual, that's the original clip. So nothing is destructive. So the thing to remember is, what I would advise is when you're going through your edit, if you've created a sequence and you like it, just duplicate that sequence. It doesn't take up any more disk space. So you're not copying all the clips. This is the thing to remember. You're just making a sort of reference to the same clip. So I could duplicate that sequence 100 times, and it might only take up 10K or something on my hard drive. The footage is the stuff that takes up the space, not the edit project. So, here I can what's called create a snapshot. So if I've liked something before I sent it to a client, I might create a snapshot and then send them the version and then tweak the snapshot to something that I prefer for maybe my own demo reel or whatever. But then work in stages, do a snapshot, work in stages, and then go through it like that. So I just want to quickly nip back and just sum up, I guess, the sort of key things before I have to go. Whoops, excuse me, I have to disappear. We've got 6 minutes. All right, here we go. Lightning fast. So I would pick your software and stick with it. The tendency is to try and learn a ton of software. Pick one, learn it really well. I used Premiere, didn't enjoy it. I stopped and changed to Final Cut about 10 years ago, and I've been using it ever since. People don't like it, that's fine. You find one that you like and stick with it. Organize the footage from the start. And think about your format before you edit. So go organize your timeline and use the majority of footage format that you've shot. So if it's all 4K and you're outputting 4K, you don't need to create an HD timeline. If you're outputting in HD and you've got it all in 4K, you could still work in 4K and then output at HD at the end. You don't have to, unless you want to do what I was showing you with the punching in and stuff like that. Pull footage into the edit software, organize it even on your hard drive before you pull it in. And then what I said at the start, trim each clip, so you top and tail it, choose the bit you want, drop that into the timeline, you assemble the edit, and then you can look at exporting the finished file, which is, to be honest, another minefield, but you can use one of the presets. They're usually quite reliable. And finally, that's a sort of gratuitous self-promotion, but I do run workshops on this now, and also on video and all that kind of stuff. So you could get in touch. I mean, I'm happy to take questions offline if you want to send me an email. I'm just trying to see whether refresh on the chat is there. Okay. How do you arrange your timeline with multiple clips? Oh, right. Okay. Hello, Laura. I'm running out of time really quickly. Really sorry, I've got 4 minutes, so I can't show you how to edit voice for clarity. But if you go back and watch my yesterday on recording audio, that is a good start. And then when you pull it into your edit suite, I think hopefully maybe in September, if we're all together, I'll do a session on audio, specifically on audio and edit. But that's a whole thing. But with audio voiceovers, the best thing with audio is to get it recorded as nicely as possible before you bring it into your edit suite. That will save you a ton of ball ache. Is there any negative to filming everything in 60p? No, absolutely not. It depends if you want that cinematic thing, because when you slow it down, you won't get that. If you're shooting in 60p, then set the shutter speed to 120, 1/120, and that will give you a cinematic-like judder rather than the sort of video-like effect. So the sort of cinematic thing is usually double what your frame rate is. So 25 seconds filming in camera, put your shutter speed at a 50th. Now you may need to use an ND filter to drop the exposure down, because if you then change, or your ISO, because if you then change your shutter speed or your f-stop, then so you can use your f-stop, but then obviously you want to keep that maybe because you want a specific look. So the tendency, what we do as filmmakers, is use an ND filter or a variable ND filter to help expose your shot correctly when you want to keep the 24 frames a second and the associated shutter speed, or the 25 and 50 or 50 and 100 or 60 and 120. How do I arrange your timeline with multiple clips and titles? I do it very like I showed you with here. I create a folder for music, a folder for rushes, a folder for titles, and I keep it all in one place. And when the client sends me their assets, I might have client graphics, client logos. So it's all about organization, but I do this before I've even brought them into the edit suite. And on my main edit suite, not this one, we've got 2 minutes, I have all my folders. So I have rushes, music, client footage. They might have a promo they want you to drop in that's been pre-shot, which will be a terrible format and you can't do anything with, like Windows Movie Maker or something awful, or an AVI from 1982. Be prepared for all this. But in theory, when you drop it into your timeline, the timeline will try and conform all that footage into what it's outputting. Now that might mean it has to render certain parts, and you want to avoid rendering as much as possible. So that is something, that's why I keep saying, think about the majority of your footage and where it's coming from before you sort of start your project. Speaking of hard drive, SSD, yes, not all SSDs are created equal, but you can't go wrong. I would think about maybe a little RAID. I know that G Drive did a presentation yesterday. They do some really lovely products. It's worth investing. I have a 64 terabyte RAID with redundancy, so if a drive fails, I can replace it. Yes, SSD. I try not to work off my main machine, and also it makes it more portable, so you can move your footage between machines. If you keep everything on one drive, the danger is if you pull in some footage and you've forgotten to, let's say a photo that someone sent you is on your main computer and you've not put it on the SSD drive, then you're going to be like, oh crap, where have I put the photo? So you need to just make sure that everything is organized. Organization is absolutely key to all of this. So, it unfortunately, I'm not the most organised of people, but you're welcome. Yes, you can do editing on the iPad Pro. I would look at an app called LumaFusion. We've got 56 seconds. LumaFusion on the iPad Pro. I will do a session on this, please God, sometime in the future. But get in touch with me if you do want to run some workshops. I do mobile editing. We can go through all this. You're all absolutely welcome. Thank you for waking up and being with me at this, what for me is an ungodly hour on a Sunday morning. It's not too early for a gin, is it? I don't think it is. So with that, it was 30 seconds left to go. I'm going to do one more chat refresh. Thank you, everybody. You're all more than welcome. Hayley, I hope it helps. I know it was a bit rushed, but it's kind of hard to do and it's a bit generic, but we can do more bespoke stuff if you want to just zap my QR code and get in touch. And that is about it, I think, from me. So you have yourselves a very lovely weekend, what's left of it. Stay safe. If you've got kids going back to school tomorrow, yes. Homeschooling is complete. I might cry. Hope you everyone stay safe, and we will hopefully see you in September. Take care and be well. Goodbye.